Hey everyone, it's Ahmed. So today I want to talk about what money moves do you need to make in your 30s so that you can retire without any issues. And I'm not talking about the folks who are focused on the FIRE movement, the financial independence retire early type of movement where people are retiring or trying to retire in their 20s and 30s and this and that. I'm talking about most people who are basically going to be retiring in their 60s and essentially have about 40 years where they're essentially working. So when you start entering your 30s, there's a lot of changes that are basically going to be happening, and they're going to be happening pretty quickly. Okay, so you may decide to get married, you may decide to buy a home, you may decide to have some kids. So you're going to go through a significant amount of changes very quickly. But the benefit or the flip side of it is you also start making a little bit more money. Okay, so in your 20s you spent that time kind of picking up a skill set, kind of picking up what it is that you want to do. But when you are in your 30s, you start accelerating that whole thing. Okay, you start moving a lot faster, and when you start accelerating those types of things, your income also goes up because you've got a specialization in a particular field. So anyway, let's talk about what are these money moves that you need to make in your 30s. So the first thing that a lot of people start thinking about in their 30s is that, oh, they want to get married. People start borrowing money to get an engagement ring, and they start borrowing money to basically pay for the wedding. And what I'd say is that is the dumbest thing that you can possibly do. Okay, nobody borrows money. You shouldn't be borrowing money for a wedding. If you can't afford the wedding, you have two moves that you can make. Either you save a lot more. That's the one thing, right? And then just delay the wedding until you've saved a sufficient amount of money. Or the second thing that you basically need to do is just put some pretty hard blocks around what it is that you're going to have in your wedding, okay? So maybe you just do a courthouse wedding. Maybe you just reduce or limit the number of attendees. Whatever it is that you need to do to basically get within a confined budget is essentially what's important, as opposed to borrowing any money, because that is absolutely ridiculous. The second thing that you may start doing is you may start thinking about you want to buy a home. If you want to buy a home, what you need to do is accumulate enough cash so that you can put 20% down and you're not dealing or facing with PMI, okay? So PMI is private mortgage insurance, and it's basically another way of saying that you don't care for money and you want to burn it, okay? So PMI is absolutely ridiculous. You should not be paying PMI in any circumstances. If you want to know about how much home you can afford, so I have done videos around that. I'll put a description below so that you can go ahead and check those out. The other thing when it comes to home ownership is if you're in your early 30s, there's somewhere in that 35-year-old range, it's perfectly fine to get a 30-year mortgage, okay? So the reason I say that is there's such a big difference between mortgage rates in the current state relative to what you can basically generate from an investment perspective or investment returns with money invested in the stock market. Now, when you start approaching 35 to 40, if you're in that sort of age group, then it becomes more important to basically have a 15-year loan. And the reason I say that is we don't want to go into your retirement, 30 years from then, and then potentially still have a mortgage debt on your head, right? You want to get into retirement and basically be debt free. The next thing that you may want to be doing, right? You may be thinking about, well, I want to have some kids, okay? So the most important thing, if you're going to have any kids, right, is to start thinking about how much these kids are actually going to cost. Now, if you have family and all of that supporting you, then it absolutely solves a lot of the issues. But if you don't, right, and a lot of people don't necessarily have that circumstance, they have to pay for daycare, and that can amount to $10,000 plus very, very easily if you're not really careful around it. The second thing that you may start thinking about is, okay, what do I start doing about these kids when it comes to getting them to college, as an example? And I talked about this in a separate video as well, but in terms of how much that you can afford for college and how much money you need to start putting in. But your best bet for all intents and purposes is as soon as the kid pops out, open up a 529 plan and start contributing so that you can realize the benefits of compound interest, and that will basically get to a point where it becomes substantial by the time these kids go off to college. The other thing that you need to start thinking about when you're in your 30s from a money management perspective is you need to start thinking about protection, okay? Protecting yourself and protecting your family. And what I mean by that is basically getting life insurance. I'll cut to the chase here, okay? If you get like a whole life policy or a universal life policy, those are a colossal waste of money, okay? The best thing that you can do is get a term 20-year life insurance policy, okay? And that'll be on yourself as well, your spouse, significant other, or equivalent, right? And you get that kind of a policy, and then you basically get it for 20 years because your goal here is that in case something happens to you or your significant other or whatever, that the kids and your significant other are basically taken care of, right? Now, the other part of this is how much insurance should you essentially get, okay? So when it comes to that, the best best way to think about it is look at your expenses that you have on an annual basis. Just get like a soft estimate around it. It does not need to be overtly precise. Multiply that by 20, put in a little factor around it of maybe like a 1 or 2% growth on an annual basis, and that should be enough such that you can get your limit on your term life policy. Okay, I wouldn't overthink this, and I definitely would not ask your insurance agent how much should you get, because they may start pushing you towards a $500,000 policy or $1 million policy and this and that, which is absolutely not needed. So just think about it in that context in terms of figuring out how much it is that you should get from a life insurance perspective. Once you've figured out all of that, right now start thinking about your investments and your basic retirement. The one thing I'll quickly caveat it by saying is this, right? So you need to start thinking about your retirement before you put any money towards the 529 plan. Your kids can figure out different ways to getting to college if they want to and paying for it, okay? But nobody's going to support you in retirement. So before you start thinking about how much money it is that you need to start saving for retirement, it's important to just do a quick net worth assessment in terms of where you are. In order to get a feel of it in terms of where you are, what you do is you basically just take your age, you multiply it by your gross income, and you multiply that by 0.1. Whatever number that spits out, that's where you should be, ideally, from a net worth perspective at that point in time. So then what is it that you should basically put your money in, right? So in this level, it's the same thing, generally the same thing as my investing in your 20s video, because your risk profile has not significantly changed, okay? You should be in full risk on mode at this point in time because you want to grow your money as quickly as possible to as much of a level as possible by the time you retire. If your employer offers, a Roth 401k, definitely go into that one first. If they don't offer a Roth 401k and they offer a traditional 401k, basically contribute towards the employer match. If that is not the case, then open up a Roth IRA as well and make sure you don't exceed the income limits on that. After that, you max out your HSA, and then if you still have more funds, go back and contribute more towards your 401k, and then once you're done with all of that, then you can open up a traditional IRA account as well. So then one of the questions that frequently comes back to me is, okay, so if I put my money in all of these things, right, where should I actually be putting my money, right? Where does it actually need to go? So what I do is I put my money in Vanguard, okay? But if whether you're in Fidelity or whether you're in Charles Schwab or any of the other brokerages, they all have their own plans and similar or equivalent funds in all of them. More specifically, when it comes to Vanguard, for me, I only put my money in really 4 funds, okay? There's a Vanguard 500 Index Fund, the Vanguard Emerging Markets Fund, Vanguard Small Cap Fund, and Vanguard US Growth Fund. Those are the funds that I basically put all my money in, and in terms of allocation, I put about 50% of my funds in the Vanguard 500, and then on the other ones, I basically just take the remaining 50% and I divide it by 3 and I allocate it across the rest, and I keep this as simple as basically possible. But doing these money moves in your 30s will get you in a nice position such that not only is your family protected, okay, you have enough money that you can afford retirement, and also your kids are essentially taken care of. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed the contents of this video. If you did, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you soon.